James Baldwin, the master of the ill-informed soundbite, asked the question, where did the idea that black is less than beautiful come from? How far back does it go? Why does this particular prejudice even matter? And how have black people disputed it? I'd like to start with a story, that of Sarah Baartman. Now, many people will know this story. It's not the first you've heard. But in the main, it tends to be identified as an issue of gender. Whereas for me, it's more about the perception of African people and, of course, African beauty. Now, Sarah was born in the late 18th century in what is now South Africa. And she was persuaded to travel to England, where she was promised wealth and fame. Now, yeah, she achieved fame, but not in the way, I suppose, that she anticipated. She was paraded around the streets in England and Ireland, mostly in a cage, so that people could stare upon her, point at her, particularly at her African beauty, particularly at what they saw as a large backside. Now, after a while, funds dried up and she was taken to Paris for the same. But there she was sold to, I suppose you could call him an entertainer, but essentially most people knew him as an animal trainer. And she was put on show again, but this time she was also made to wear a collar, paraded around the streets, and taken to private parties, sold to private parties where people again could touch her, and according to some, prostituted out by the same person. Now, of course, this was pressure on Sarah in a way that she never imagined. She didn't last very long, died soon after. It was said that she died of alcohol poisoning and syphilis. But this wasn't the end of Sarah. Her body was dissected, and parts of it, her skeleton, her brain, her genitalia, were put on display in French museums. And this lasted for around about 150 years they were on display. Now, many people had identified Sarah as being intelligent, as being somebody who had a grasp of a number of languages. She spoke French, she spoke Dutch. She spoke English, as well as, of course, her indigenous language. But her remains were put on show as part of these pseudo-scientific theories that abounded about the primitiveness of African people, how we were far closer to apes and monkeys than Europeans. Following the fall of apartheid in South Africa, the new South African government appealed to the French for the return of her body parts so that they could get a proper burial. It took 8 years before the French finally agreed to this. And in 2002, the body parts were returned to South Africa, where she was buried on a hill above where they believed she originated. And a memorial stone was erected in her honour. Now, Sarah's experience took place over 200 years ago. What's the relevance to today? What have black people done to dispute this? Well, very little, because today her burial ground is seen almost as a shrine, where people go on pilgrimage, essentially people who themselves have suffered the same as Sarah, prejudice simply because of their African beauty. Dark skin, the darker the skin, the greater the prejudice. Flat nose, the flatter the nose, the greater the prejudice. Nappy hair, the nappier the hair, the greater the prejudice. And this coming from family members, members of their own community, black African people themselves, that prejudice. We haven't done anything to change the world's perception of African beauty. Most of us have tried to escape from it, move away from it, bleach our skin, straighten our hair. The old school, put a clothes peg on the baby's nose so it'll grow straight. New school, go to a plastic surgeon for rhinoplasty. No, we distance ourselves from that so that we could fit in more with the European ideal of what is beautiful, because those ideals have become our ideals. Europeans marauded around the world, conquering sovereign nations and embedding their values. This perception of African people as being ugly goes back centuries. And just let me read these. We're talking about Voltaire, 17th to 18th century, where he said, their round eyes, their flat nose, their lips, which are always thick, their differentially shaped ears, and the wool on their head, the measures even of their intelligence establishes between them and other species of men prodigious differences. And then Johann Blumenbach in the 18th and 19th century. The Caucasian race displays in general that kind of appearance which, according to our opinion of symmetry, we consider most handsome and becoming. Our opinion. We consider. These colloquial values were what Europeans embedded in the areas that they conquered, the territories they conquered, so that today we almost see them as human values, as values that apply to us all. Cecil Rhodes, 19th, 20th century. Englishmen had won the lottery of life purely for being Englishmen. And I suppose for Englishmen we could read Europeans, male or female. White people, male or female. In the 21st century, OkCupid, which is a dating site, carried out a survey between 2009 and 2014. And the results of that survey was that in each year, apart from 2012 and 2014, black women received a negative score from all races, including black men. In 2014, they received a score of 1%. And in 2012, a score of 0%. So, at least it wasn't a negative score. Black men achieved a negative score from all races over all years, apart from black women. Now, the leader, or the owner of OkCupid, Christian Rudder, said that, and I quote, essentially, every race, including other black people, gives black women the cold shoulder. Diora Sajanova, a Uzbekistani journalist, said, black contestants in Love Island tend to get picked last. Fortunately, it comes down to how our society portrays as attractive, or what our society portrays as attractive in popular culture. To put it plainly, Western or European beauty standards dictate that whiteness, or Europeanness, is an ideal, whilst blackness, Africanness, is undesirable. Now, I stressed popular culture there because so much of what we term popular culture in European states or European nations, and when I say European, I'm not talking geography now. I'm talking about culture and values. Places like North America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are simply places that Europeans made their home and in which they embedded their culture and is still built around or structured around their cultural values. Now, why? of course, we go back to slavery and colonialism. You couldn't enslave people who were your equal. That would cause uproar. I mean, as it is, Europeans suffered questions and so on based on their practice during slavery. And they developed what we now call racism as a way of justifying what they were doing. The world had to believe that Africans were a backward, primitive, savage people. And they could even benefit from slavery, making them like Europeans, giving them European language, European religion, European cultural values, making them human beings, civilized, and so on. But of course, we've never really challenged that, have we? Our challenge has been trying to fit in, trying to become European, as mentioned before, which is why it still persists, this view as Africans as ugly. Jo Marney in 2018, Jo Marney was the girlfriend of the then leader of the UK Independence Party, Henry Bolton. She said, "Never have sex with a Negro. Black people are ugly." And of course, she was talking about, at the time, Prince Harry's choice of Meghan Markle as his fiancée. Now, the following year, we have Amber Gill, a contestant in Love Island, as mentioned before. A black woman, a woman of mixed race. She appeared in social media in a club giving the finger to a black man and saying, "I don't like black guys." Now, she tried to defend herself by saying that, well, I'm not racist. Of course I'm not. I'm black. My father is black. He's from the Caribbean. So what? Racism isn't about colour. It's not black on white or white on black. Racism is about ideals and values that elevate European. It was about ensuring European supremacy, the kind of supremacy that we see all around us today. So the belief that everything European is superior and everything, say, African, for example, is inferior, is far more important than whether you're black or white. And you don't have to be white to believe that everything European is superior. People from the Caribbean originated in Africa. Thousands of years in Africa. Hundreds of years in the Caribbean. Many never travelling further than, say, the Bahamas. But still, somehow, saw Britain, France, Holland and so on as their mother country. Why? People travelled from the Caribbean to this country to try to save their mother country. They travelled singing songs like "London is the place for me," for someone who'd never even been to London. So how the hell do they know that? We, even the survivors today of the Windrush scandal, which is what I'm referring to, make statements like, "We put the great in Great Britain." Say it with pride, almost. Not remembering the fact that it was putting the great in Great Britain, or the attempts to put the great in Great Britain, that led to our subjection, that led to our suppression, oppression, using slavery and colonialism to make Britain great. And I don't care what Kemi Badenoch says, that the wealth and power that Britain had nothing to do with slavery or colonialism. This is a woman who said that colonialism was a good thing. Who said that thanks to Britain for what they've done in Nigeria in terms of keeping, if you like, warring parties apart and keeping the peace, as it were. Forgetting completely that Nigeria never existed before the British came, put a border around a piece of land that contained many disparate communities, forcing them to live together, and then exploiting their differences to ensure that they never got to the state where they could challenge British rule. She also admires one of her great heroes, Boris Johnson, a person who believes that Africa should be recolonised, calling for European nations to go back to Africa and take control. That's how embedded we are within European values and ideals. And of course, the more embedded we are in those values and ideals, the more we vindicate them. And the more we lead to that oppression. You cannot say that, black is black and ugly. You cannot talk about nappy, nasty hair. You cannot talk about flat, ugly noses and then look in the mirror and feel good about yourself. You can't distance yourself from how other people see you. You have to change the values they use to assess what you are, rather than just trying to prove that you're like them. We may talk about blackness, but really the central thing is Africanness. The colour black is merely an identifier for all those things society has been taught over the centuries, all those negative things about African people. And if we don't adjust that, if we don't amend those, if we don't deal with those, then we'll continue to be oppressed. You may think that, you're included because you've shaved your head or you've straightened your hair, you've lightened your skin. And maybe you are more acceptable, as it were. But everyone else isn't, and those prejudices still remain. And it was those prejudices that led to the diabolically bad life that Sarah Baartman had, and that people are still living today, which is, again, like I said, why they flock to her graveside, to get a sense of strength, a better sense of identity, to be proud about who and what they are, or even to accept, I should say, rather than be proud, to accept what they are.